Today, we're going to talk about the single most complicated commercial product humanity has ever built. Seriously. This is a machine that our entire digital world is built on, and for decades, pretty much everyone agreed that actually creating it was completely impossible.
So what is this thing? You might be thinking of a particle accelerator or maybe a massive space telescope. Well, this machine is arguably way more essential to your day-to-day life than any of those. For starters, just one of them costs an absolutely staggering $400 million. To put that in perspective, that's more than a brand new Boeing 747. And what it does inside is it's mind-bending. 50,000 times every single second, it creates a tiny supernova. It heats up a droplet of molten tin to over 220,000 Kelvin. That is 40 times hotter than the surface of the sun. And the precision? It operates on a level that is almost impossible to wrap your head around. When it's printing the microscopic layers of a computer chip, its margin for error is less than 5 atoms wide. So, what is this impossible machine? I know, it sounds like pure science fiction, but it's real. It exists today. But for 30 long years, trying to build it was seen as a fool's errand. A total technological fantasy that just seemed to defy the basic laws of physics.
To really understand why this machine absolutely had to be built, we've got to go back in time a little. There was a huge crisis brewing in the tech industry. A crisis so big, it's threatened to stop all technological progress right in its tracks. You see, for over half a century, our world has run on something called Moore's Law. It's the simple observation that's the reason your phone gets faster every year, your computer gets more powerful. It's the engine of modern life. More transistors on a chip meant more speed, more power. Simple as that. Now, the secret to packing in more and more transistors is a process called photolithography. The simple version is this. Think of it like screen printing a t-shirt, but on an insanely small scale. You coat a silicon wafer with a light-sensitive material, you shine light through a stencil to make a pattern, and then you etch that pattern into the silicon, building a chip layer by tiny layer. But here's where they ran into a huge problem. It all came down to the light itself. See, to print smaller transistors, you need shorter wavelengths of light. It's like trying to draw a tiny, detailed picture. You need a super sharp pencil, not a thick magic marker. By the 2000s, the industry was using 193 nanometer light, and they had hit a solid brick wall. They just couldn't make the light any sharper. By the mid-2010s, this wasn't just a problem, it was an existential threat. They had pushed their tools to the absolute physical limit. Without a totally new kind of light, Moore's Law, the engine that had powered innovation for 50 years, was about to die. So what do? Well, the solution, it turns out, came from a crazy idea, one that was first floated way back in the 1980s, and it seemed to just completely ignore everything we thought we knew about physics. A Japanese scientist, Hiro Kinoshita, had this wild suggestion to use something called extreme ultraviolet light. EUV for short. Its wavelength was perfect, incredibly tiny, just what they needed to print microscopic circuits. But there was a massive problem. EUV light is so energetic that it gets absorbed by literally everything. Air, glass, you name it. That meant you couldn't use a glass lens to focus it because the lens would just soak up all the light. The only way to steer it would be to bounce it off of mirrors. So, when Kinoshita actually managed to present the very first image made with EUV light back in 1986, the scientific community was, let's just say, not impressed. He later said they basically treated it like a big fish story, something totally made up and unbelievable. And he wasn't the only one. A few years later, an American scientist named Andrew Hawryluk got up on stage to present a very similar idea. His colleagues literally laughed him off the stage. They told him exactly why it was a stupid idea that can never ever work. The message was loud and clear. Forget it. But even with that tiny glimmer of possibility, turning this stupid idea into a machine you could actually build and sell, well, that turned into a monumental struggle. It would take more than 3 decades, billions of dollars, and some of the most incredible ingenuity you can imagine. And this timeline, it barely even scratches the surface. I mean, think about it. From that first fish story image in '86, it took another 14 years just to build one slow, clunky prototype. And for years after that, the whole project was constantly on the verge of being canceled because customers were losing faith. It took a full 30 years before the first commercial orders were finally placed in 2016. To get there, engineers had to solve a list of problems that sound like they're straight out of a sci-fi movie. First on the list, create a stable artificial sun on Earth to generate the light. No big deal, right? Next, build mirrors so perfect they are literally the smoothest objects ever made by humans. Then, you have to hit a target the size of a white blood cell with a laser 50,000 times a second without a single miss. And you have to do all of that while protecting those priceless mirrors from a constant storm of debris. So who did it? Who actually solved these possible problems? You might think it was one of the huge tech giants, but it wasn't. Incredibly, it was one company, a relatively small Dutch firm called ASML. They were the ones who picked up the torch after basically everyone else had given up and walked away. Okay, so their solution for creating the light, this is where it gets really wild. Inside a vacuum chamber, the machine fires a tiny, microscopic droplet of molten tin. A super high-powered laser then blasts that droplet, instantly vaporizing it into a plasma that's 40 times hotter than the sun. And that explosion releases a burst of pure EUV light. They are literally creating tiny supernovas 50,000 times a second. But the real game changer was a brilliant little trick, a two-pulse laser system. A small pre-pulse laser zaps the droplet first, which flattens it into a perfect little pancake shape. Then, a fraction of a second later, the massive main laser blast hits that pancake and vaporizes it. This change, which sounds simple, dramatically increased the power and efficiency, and it solved one of the biggest roadblocks they've been facing for years. Okay, so what about those mirrors? Since glass lenses were out, ASML's partner, a company called Zeiss, had to create the smoothest objects in human history. To give you an idea of how perfect they are, get this. If you scaled one of these mirrors up to be the size of the entire planet Earth, the biggest bump on its surface would be no thicker than a playing card. But creating all those tiny supernovas leaves behind a huge mess, a constant storm of tin debris that would absolutely destroy those perfect mirrors in an instant. The solution? Just as brilliant. A precisely controlled hurricane-force storm of hydrogen gas is constantly blowing past the main mirror at over 360 kilometers per hour. It acts like a force field, chemically cleaning away any stray tin atoms before they even have a chance to land. So, at the end of the day, why does any of this matter to you? Because this one machine single-handedly saved Moore's Law. It is the only reason we can make the advanced computer chips that power your smartphone, your computer, modern cars, and all the data centers that run things like AI and 5G networks. It is, and this is no exaggeration, one of the greatest engineering achievements in all of human history. When you really think about it, this whole 30-year journey is a story about a handful of people who just refused to accept the word impossible. It really is the perfect example of this famous quote. All the reasonable, smart experts said it couldn't be done. But progress didn't depend on them. It depended on the few unreasonable pioneers who, against all odds, decided to adapt the world to their vision.